you're in the right place. This is the Eatfluencer Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Maggie Landis. Together, we are going to unpack everything about eating and discover the what, when, and how that will let you lead your best life. This is not your doctor's conversation about nutrition. Today is when you can start to love eating again. Let food be food and you be you. Get ready to get Eatfluenced. Welcome back to another episode of the Eatfluencer Podcast. I'm Maggie Landis. I'm the host here, and I'm glad you've joined me, whether this is your first listening here or you're a repeat listener. I'm thrilled to have you be part of this non-diet conversation. And today I have a guest you're going to love, particularly if you are a parent, specifically if you're a mother. This is an episode you are not going to want to miss because we are going to be talking about breaking that generational diet cycle for our children, which is huge, and is the, to be honest, primary motivation for a lot of women I meet. They just don't want their younger children, teenage children, to fall into a whole life cycle of dieting and weight problems, weight cycling, all sorts of psychological fallout from disordered eating. And certainly we want to prevent eating disorders in our kids as they grow up and become young adults. And I've got an expert today that's going to talk about how we approach this problem, not only to fix our own relationship with food and our body image, but to really stop the cycle. And that, in my opinion, is how we're going to ultimately change this culture, because we are the culture. When we say that there's this social belief system that thinness is idolized and all that stuff, it's we are what makes up these belief systems, we collectively. So, getting to the root of the problem and stopping our children and teenagers from getting into this pattern and promoting a dieting lifestyle and living out these toxic cultural beliefs, we're protecting them, we're helping then subsequent generations after them. So it's really, really important. And this, like I said, sometimes this is the hooker for the moms is, we kind of put our children first in a lot of respects. And it's one thing to know that dieting is distracting and invasive and screwing up your relationship with food, but to be able to alleviate that burden from your kids and from your family is huge. So the expert today is going to talk all about these issues. I hope that you stick through the whole episode. I also want to just remind you, we are going into the holidays. I'm going to have a new episode next Wednesday. I'm going to have a couple of important announcements, so make sure that you're tuned in to episode 60 next week. Also, my Facebook group is live still and hopping. People are participating, bringing up questions, struggles, wins, things that they've seen and run into, and we're working through it together as a group. We've got almost 400 women in there, many of them whom are very active and supporting each other. So if you're interested in a free Facebook group opportunity, I know a lot of people are just sick of Facebook or Metaverse or whatever it's going to be now. But even if you only pop on just to look at the group and then you don't scroll, that would be cool too. So let me know. You can send me a direct message on Facebook or on Instagram at Maggie Landis MD, and I'll get you an invite. But let's get into today's show. Like I said, we have a guest today you are going to love. Amelia Sherry, who has a master's in public health, also is a registered dietitian, a nutrition therapist, food parenting expert, and certified diabetes counselor and educator. She's got more letters after her name than I do. So she comes from a very strong educational pedigree. And I met her, honestly, I can't remember if I met her on Instagram or where I met her, but immediately was drawn to her energy. And she's so good at explaining stuff in a real simple way. And the struggles that people have introducing these ideas into a family, particularly if you have a child who has had quote, weight issues as identified by their doctor, if you're dealing with diabetes or other chronic disease, like that just makes, applying these non-diet weight neutral principles even more complicated. But she makes this seem totally within reach and is just as sharp as a tack. I love talking to her, and I hope you enjoy our interview today. You can find more out about Amelia at her website, which is Amelia Sherry. That's Amelia with an A, and Sherry, SHERRY.com. That's going to be in the show notes. She also is the founder of NourishHer, an online space dedicated to helping mothers who are recovered or recovering from diet culture to raise children to have happy, healthy relationships with food. She's got an Instagram account at Amelia Sherry RD, and through the NourishHer.com website, she's got a free mini class called the NourishHer Well Workshop. And let's get right into the interview here with Amelia. All right, and welcome, Amelia. I'm so glad you're here with me today on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this for weeks, and I'm really excited.
Well, absolutely. And this is going to be such a great conversation. Today, we're talking about dealing with this generational diet trauma, if I can even call it that, generational diet trauma that we want to break for our children. But before we get into that conversation, which I know is your area of expertise, I am curious how you, as a registered dietitian, landed in this non-diet, anti-diet world, because we all know that is not how the training is set up. So I'm curious what your story is. How did you get here?
Yeah, it's always a long sword story, right? I not by intention. I became a nutritionist as a second career. I worked in women's magazines, and I don't know how much I told you about this already. I worked in women's magazines as a writer and editor for years. I had a very dysfunctional, disordered relationship with food since the time I was in middle school, although I never had a clinically diagnosed eating disorder. I was never hospitalized for an eating disorder. Thank God, by the grace of God, I never got to that point, which, unfortunately so many girls and people do. But in any way, I had like a subclinical eating disorder, basically. And it followed me through college and into my first career, where I was very focused. I worked at Fitness Magazine. I worked in health. I worked in nutrition.
I can only imagine the hotbed of diet culture in that type of discipline. Yeah.
It was just, I was part of the club. There was no real alternative. I mean, I took a lot of pride in trying to mind my weight, and I had so much information from all those years of dieting and watching my weight. Like, I knew every workout and I ended up kind of really in magazines, you get kind of a niche that you're known for. And mine was nutrition. It was because I had known every diet. And unfortunately, and I hate putting my mom on the spot, because she did everything she could to raise me the best way she could. A lot of the information that I went into those jobs with was stuff I learned at home. Not even necessarily dieting stuff. She's very into being health conscious. So I knew so much about food. But in any event, I went.
Well, let me ask you for a question. What decade are we talking here? Like,
so I graduated high school in 1993. Okay. So probably the late 80s.
Yeah.
My mom was into Weight Watchers. We're probably same, right?
We're the same age, right? And so just to
videos.
Yeah, it was normative. Like, it really was. Like, I don't think your mom and her being health conscious like she was really doing what was the cultural norm to be, quote, healthy. And it's we didn't even call it really dieting, because it was just, that's,
Yeah, well, she would watch her weight and diet. She was a little extreme in that everything had to be organic, and just that wasn't as in vogue back then, at least for our
right.
you know, where we lived and things like that. My mom wasn't raised in the 60s, actually, in like the 50s and the 40s, but she was older. But in any event, but the dieting, watching your weight was just common. It was like when I talk about it a lot, my mom was really trying to help me, and anytime she encouraged me, I expressed, and this is a trap a lot of moms that I work with get into, a lot of mom, even friends I know, like peers. I expressed dissatisfaction with my weight, and my mom was trying to help me. And it was also a way to bond. Like, she was doing things to help herself and take care of herself, is the way she referred to it. And it was a way for us to do it together. Now, it was very damaging for me. Some people it's not. It was very damaging for me, and I became very focused on it. I had other issues, and that I used that as a way to, I think, cope. Like, I can fix things. I can feel normal if I can get my weight to a certain point. And I was just off to the races with it, you know?
Yeah.
So
it's the illusion of control a little bit. It's the, you know, it's when a lot of other things in our life are out of control. For a lot of people, that's the control that they have.
yeah. And I go a little deeper into it. I'm a writer too, so I was a writer for years. So I go a little deeper into it, not so much with my clients when we're doing nutrition counseling, but in my writing. There are other things, like, I think when what you're trying to control is position in the world. Like, a thinner body, better looks is equated with power. My mom saw that, and she knew if I could take care of myself, I would have more, almost like collateral to work with. So there are deeper issues. There are things that I felt I couldn't express, and, you know, sort of a repression. And we don't have to get too into it today, but a repression of your appetite, your desires, and your hungers is really a suppression of a lot of things that I wanted to express and felt very, you know, limited to. And yeah, it came out a lot in my eating and overeating. I binged, I dieted, was just a lot, all the stuff that was going on inside of me, you know? I don't want to say that is for everyone, but I do think so my business, NourishHer, focuses on women and girls. And I know boys suffer from diet culture as well, but there's an extra element that women do have going on, and I don't want to minimize it. You know, I like to explore it because there's an extra pressure there. And I think
agree. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It's women and girls have sort of targets on their back from diet culture, you know, and men and boys are not excluded, but I don't think they're the primary victims,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so I agree with that.
Yeah.
So here you are. So you're a writer for these Fitspo fashion magazines and all this stuff. You're an expert in nutrition because you have managed to control your own body and everything. So how did we get here?
I did that for years. At a certain point, the economy collapsed. I became a freelancer. Things happened. Things changed in my life. I was freelancing. I had more freedom with what I wanted to do. My mom, unfortunately, became sick at one point, and I was spending a lot of time in hospitals. And I just had the other thing with working magazines is you do not write you write what the editors and the business people who run the business sells magazines, and diets sold because of diet culture. So I would write the same things over and over and over. And I would give a lot of the same advice. A lot of healthy eating is basic things, you know, eat some fruits and vegetables, move your body, drink some water. And I would just be doing the same thing over and over and over. And I would have a hard time understanding why people were like getting it. Now I know, but why I wasn't working. So I had a desire to work more in one-on-one, and I was spending time in the hospital. So the idea of becoming a nutritionist appealed to me. And so because of some changes in my life and circumstances, I had the opportunity to go back to school, which I had wanted to do for years, but couldn't. But things opened up for me, and I went back to school and did all the coursework, and then the internship and the supervision, and then I had a graduate degree in public health, and did all the things and got my credential. And it coincided with me getting married and becoming a mother. So I was very focused on child nutrition. And I simultaneously went into pediatrics. I went right into pediatric endocrinology because that was what was available to me. In hindsight, it was fascinating because in pediatric endocrinology, we see all the kids who are referred to me for putting on too much weight or being in larger bodies, and then all the kids who are underweight and having growth issues. And as I became to sort of apply everything I had learned in nutrition school, I was butting up against my own eating. I skipped a very important part, which is that I recovered from my disordered eating. And I skipped over that completely. Prior to becoming a mother, I invested a lot of time in reading, exploring. I lived by myself for a few years. I was in a relationship, and I got really to the root of what I was talking about before, like uncovering what was I really searching for with all this dieting. Because truth be told, hundreds of diets that I was on, my weight fluctuated about 4 pounds in all of the, I probably gained and lost 60, 65 pounds, but from beginning to end, my weight really never changed. And I had to get over it. My friends were all in my peer group moving on with their lives. They were in relationships or having families, and I was just stuck in this,
Sure. It consumes you. It becomes like a whole identity, truly. I mean, a lot of women just, every waking thought is regarding food or their body. And that's all they have the bandwidth to participate in. So I'm glad that you found your way out of that.
Yeah. I'm glad I did too. I did a lot of searching, and not the traditional way. We have a lot of there's more avenues now with intuitive eating and things like that. I did actually read about intuitive eating, and that was great. And I needed even a little more than that. Wasn't enough for me once I became a mom. But anyway, I recovered. Then I became a mom and a nutritionist at the same time. And I was now challenged with helping these children and their families manage, and I'm using air quotes here, their weight. And it was in antithetical or in opposition to everything I had untaught myself,
Right.
So yeah,
that's tricky because it is so hard. And I have a clinical background as well. And it's hard to do something that's a little countercultural to your professional pedigree. I mean, we are just, trained to do one thing. And in a lot of the dietetics world and in clinical medicine, it is help people, quote, like you said, manage their weight. But that is not helping. And we know that that's not helping anybody's health, not their emotional or mental health. And certainly, I don't think their physical health either. So let's talk a little bit about how, like, talking to the moms that are listening to this podcast that have children of a variety of ages, where's the place to, like, how do they even recognize diet culture in their own behavior or in their own home? Where do they, some people, this is a new idea, so where's kind of the starting point in your opinion?
How do they recognize it? Actually, that's challenging. And I struggle with that a lot because there's two sort of fractions of parents. So a lot of parents will come to me because they want to help, because their child is facing a weight issue. Otherwise, it just kind of goes as sleeping dogs lie. They might not even realize diet culture is an issue. I've noticed that moms that are interested in this topic typically have a disordered past. So that idea, the term diet culture just clicks something in their mind. And so they're aware that there is a potential to become disordered. And people usually, moms and parents come to me usually when sometimes a child gaining weight, which happens in puberty to girls naturally, can be very triggering if you've had a disordered past. So how do you recognize it in your behavior? First of all, you have to have that desire and really understand how negative and how harmful the behaviors can be, I think.
Right.
You might recognize it like when you are talking to your child and about if you feel that you're giving them advice with food or eating and something feels wrong, because a lot of what we're taught to say to our children is if you are recovered from a dieting history, can just feel off. Like, why am I telling my child not to eat that when I
Right.
I don't want them to worry, about what they're eating. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Well, no, you are. And it's because I think a lot of people, just as we've talked about your mom and my mom and everybody else's mom, we have the best intentions. All right. But we get caught in this sort of binary world where it's like, I'm supposed to take all this health advice that I'm getting from everybody and the media and every culture and, make sure that my child is as healthy as possible. That's part of my duty as a parent. But then, when we have recovered from or recovering from decades of dieting and perhaps even eating disorders, like that started in that same advice that we were receiving in the 1980s or 90s or whatever, like that's hard to reconcile in our head because what we're told is the best for our kids, we know first person didn't feel best for us. Right.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so is that where this reparenting, I know you use this term reparenting. I want you to explain that. We talked about it a little bit earlier, and it's something that I was not familiar with, that term. I'm curious if am I using it right in this?
Yeah. I'll explain reparenting. That's a newer idea that I've been talking about recently. I think I have a better answer to your first question with where parents can recognize diet culture. It usually comes up in two ways. One, your child is gaining a lot of weight, not just gaining weight, because gaining weight is normal with growth, but if their BMI or their BMI percentile is going very up or very down, basically there's an imbalance in their eating. So there's some sort of eating dysfunction going on. Not to say that being in a larger body is wrong, incorrect, or unhealthy. I'm not saying that wrong, but a change in the BMI percentile, without getting too clinical, it signals that there's like an imbalance or dysfunction. So a parent might see that their weight is changing in a strange way.
Right. And the BMI is like, I have to stop for just a second because I rail on the BMI all the time because I don't think it's particularly valuable. It was not designed for individual healthcare. And in adults, I think it's 100% useless. But in children, I mean, there is some caveat to like measuring growth and development in children. Like we have to measure it somehow, and so it is used. And you're mentioning it now, and I just want to put that out there that like, they're probably like, Maggie, she says BMI is terrible and it's not good for anything.
Would you like me to explain?
We just sort of don't have another way in pediatrics, like to monitor growth.
Right. So we want to make sure that we do need to look at it in children from my perspective, but not in the way that we're trained in most pediatricians, and that we don't want to say this BMI is healthy and this one is unhealthy, or this number is good and this number is bad. But for children, they do grow, and you're more of an expert at this than I am, but in a developmentally appropriate way or predictable way.
They have their own trajectory. We want them to follow their own growth trajectory, basically.
Right. So wherever they're plotting, high or low, is fine. We just want them to maintain their curve. So from my perspective, wherever they are is fine, but they need to maintain. When they shoot up off that curve or down, we know it could be many things. Usually by the time they get to me, those other biological things have been explored, or genetic things, other possibilities. And now we're really looking at eating behavior. So when you want to figure out if diet culture is coming into your life, if your child's BMI has gone off the rails, so to speak, out of their lane where they were predicted to sort of be, there's probably a dysfunction in eating, and they may be getting the messages that come from diet culture or even health culture that are negatively impacting their eating. One being restraint, restriction, limiting. It might not even come from a parent, although a parent can be a very strong force in their life, positively speaking as well. Could be coming from outside. The other way diet culture, you might notice, is getting interrupted is if your child is expressing to you dissatisfaction with their body, because we need to undress and unwrap that and get them in a good spot and get them on track with that as well, and reflect back to them a lot of the issues that I talk about at NourishHer, which is acceptance and trust, permission, all these things that we need to give around food. So I think that dieting and diet culture and even health culture come to mind, or you can get a signal as a parent if your child's complaining about their weight or dissatisfaction with their body. or if you do see a big change in their BMI, you're not sure, if everything else has been ruled out, eating can be at play. And we want to figure out what disrupted it. Were they getting messages? Messages about restraint, we know, are linked with overeating and binging. And typically we might see decline and then an incline,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because young children, like young pre-verbal toddler age kids, before they've been totally influenced by all this cultural stuff, they're like really good at intuitive eating. I mean, we are built to intuitively eat, and for the body to do what it's supposed to do with the energy coming in and regulate our appetite and regulate our weight. And it just sort of like,
yeah,
we have broken it. I mean, because the
yeah,
human body works. My fundamental belief is that the body works. And so we have to, like, I like the word disrupt. Like you said, it's sort of like it's fine until it's disrupted.
right, right. And I going back to where I was at when I was in school, becoming a mom, and then I had this disordered past. You go through one school you take in graduate school is life cycle nutrition. And in the beginning, you learn about prenatal nutrition, then you learn about infants, and you learn about this internal regulation, and that eating is a biopsycho social process that's very robust, and is very resilient. And it basically means your child can self-regulate. Everyone knows, and I talk about this with moms a lot, it's impossible to tell an infant that they need to take an extra, to latch on more or to take more
Right.
bottle. And it's also hard to tell them, let's stop. They will scream and cry and break your bones, like, emotionally, until they get fed.
Right.
So they're very, very in tune with it. And our job as parents is to maintain that through their life. Unfortunately, they grow, they become more social, they want to please you. We want to keep them healthy, but we have misconceptions, and we start
About what that means. Yeah. What activity
yeah,
that means.
yeah, we
Yeah.
start impacting, influencing their eating in ways that are not supportive of their own internal regulation and body trust. So we want to keep encouraging them to turn inward and listen to their body. And healthy kids can manage their intake quite well. It is different from day to day, but so are their needs.
Right. Exactly. So what does that look like? And maybe we talk about this reparenting idea, or if that fits in. I'm curious how like, it's okay for us to do something different than either we received as children ourselves, or even perhaps than we have done as parents in the past. Like,
Mhm.
it's okay to sort of come up with new ideas and change our mind or change our ways. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think if you're having issues, then we might want to think about being open to change, right? I mean, first we have to figure out what the issues are, but reparenting around food. Um, I teach specific strategies to help, that are all evidence-based, to help parents keep their children in line with their internal regulation. And their evidence-based strategies that, like, division responsibility. I teach structure. There are many concepts and things. And as an adult, you can, they're not typically what our parents taught us. And I mentioned some before: trust around food, body trust, listening to your appetite and your body wisdom. That was not a lesson my mother taught me.
Oh, no. And it wasn't of anybody's mom in 1980. It was like, 3 square, lunches at this time, dinners at this time, you are
Mhm.
allowed this amount of food or whatever.
Right.
That's just how that was a social convention.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And it's veiled now under being healthy instead of, if we're not even overtly recommending weight loss. We're trying to keep our child healthy with a lot of rules. But what we want to do, and I have specific ways to help parents do that. And you can also apply it to yourself. And we talk, a lot of us who are in recovery talk about this a lot, about turning back into body trust. And again, there's specific strategies. I don't know. I know
Is
we're
this sort of
running
like
out of
the parenting version of intuitive eating? I mean, loosely, I don't want to, I'm not
time.
taking their
Somewhat.
content, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So intuitive eating is restoring trust and listening to your body when you're a parent. And that helped me recover from disordered eating quite a bit because of where I grew up. You have to come from a very privileged place. So you have to have a lot of access to food and like things like that in order to now say that we need to work on being okay with eating. But intuitive eating helps with a certain group of people. It helped me from where I was coming from at the time. As a parent, intuitive eating was not enough. We also we want to be intuitive eaters and allow permission with food for our children, full permission, but we want to do it within some structure. And that goes back to to the division of responsibility, which is getting more and more press lately. That's from the 80s, ironically.
Yes, Ellen Satter, right? Yeah.
Ellen Satter, yeah. So the structure is the parent's going to decide the time, and what foods are offered and where. And then within that structure, your child should be an intuitive eater. We want to encourage them to turn inward and decide how much or how little. So intuitive eating is wonderful. Satter differs from intuitive eating a little bit because of this structure element. So there are some boundaries, and from working with families and even myself, reparenting myself around food, have found structure to be so helpful, because when the sky's the limit with food, choice can become overwhelming. Like, am I going to stop now and eat? Am I going to do this? Am I going to?
Yes.
The structure helps me. And from a research point of view, we see that it helps with internal regulation. It decreases pickiness. Kids are more likely to accept foods if they're more hungry. We want their appetite to build by just having some time between meals, as opposed to just letting them intuitively eat sort of all day or graze all day. So we can apply the strategies that I teach parents can be applied to ourselves, and we can reparent ourselves if we didn't have that approach when we were younger. For sure, absolutely. We can give ourselves permission. We can trust ourselves. We could set up structure for ourselves. We can undo some of those things that we were taught, like restriction, restraint, being confined to certain things. We can undo that for sure.
Yeah. And I love that idea, because that's a conflict parents have, is they want the structure. They don't want eating for themselves or for their children to be just this total free for all. That's really uncomfortable for people. I mean, it just is, but they don't want to be back in that diet mindset, that really punishing, like you said, restrictive, exclusive kind of thing. And so there's got to be some level of infrastructure. And I love that you help people really build that for their families so that it works with, and I'm assuming this could be sort of employed with any age kid, right? From like little bitty toddlerish up to teenagers. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, it does change a little with developmental stage. So like an infant so for typically maybe 5 to 12 years old, parents are going to decide what, when, and where. And then the child will decide how much or how little. For an infant, we're going to let them decide when too, right? They can't hold a lot of food for a long time, and they're going to tell us when they need to eat. But as their tummy can hold more food and they get a little older, we can have we can define the when more. And as you get even older, then the child, transfer responsibility on, 12, 13, 14, they have more autonomy. They can start deciding the when and the what a little more. So it does change a little over time. That I like to think always, like when you're teaching your child to ride a bike, like, yes, or even walk, like you want them to learn, they're going to turn into their body and learn balance and things like that. But you're going to have a safe place for them to do it. And that's the structure. And you're going to teach them the structure, like we make time to eat, we prioritize it at these times of day. And then within that time, your body is in control, right? You decide. But without that, they need that structure, because eating whenever you want isn't realistic. I know intuitive eaters want to give full permission. It's usually because they're recovering from a lot of restraint, but it's not realistic. I mean, I have to go to work. I need to focus.
Right. Exactly.
People from 9 to 12. Our kids need to be in school. They can't. They have to learn to eat within some kind of confinement.
Right.
The confinement sounds so negative, but some sort of structure.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be very reassuring to people, because a lot of times the like I said, the hesitation in trying any of these things with kids is like, well, if I give them any loosey-goosey permissions, it's going to just go off the rails. It's going to be just bad, goes to worse. And it doesn't have to be like jumping off a cliff. There's lots of sort of systematized ways to do that. So I'd love for you, as we kind of wrap up our conversation here, Amelia, to offer, like, if you have any sort of low hanging fruit, like takeaway tips in terms of what somebody who's listening to this and is kind of ready for like, okay, I think that perhaps I need to spend some energy learning about this, doing some things. They want to enhance their child's relationship with food and body image and that sort of thing. What would be your couple of pointers? I know that's tight because there's a lot. You have a lot to offer.
Yeah, I just got finished teaching a free little mini class, so I'll just go over the 4 strategies quickly that I gave away in that class if you want.
Sure, perfect. That'll be perfect.
The very first thing that we always start with in nutrition counseling when someone comes, and the very first thing we start in my program is getting clarity around eating. So asking yourself, and you can keep one child in mind or your whole family or even yourself if you're reparenting yourself. What is my goal here? What is my goal with eating? What am I after? If I were to put time into healing this, what would it look like? To want to get very clear with what your goal is. And that will help. It's like, I would say it's like a North Star when you're making decisions. Like if your goal is to protect your daughter from dieting and diet culture or to have a healthy relationship with food, then it will be easier to go out on a limb and not restrict or limit foods as much if you're learning that restriction leads to overeating and distrust of your body. So sometimes your goal, if your child has a health condition, your goal is very different. It's very specific, right. But for this, for right now, that might be a goal, to have a healthy relationship with food, and you can use that.
So clarity of goals, that's the first
clarity one. Of your goal with your child. And what I always say too, is you want it to be your goal, because sometimes we let doctors influence, and the doctor says, well, the BMI isn't in the right spot. And now their agenda has just come on.
Yeah.
Or your mother-in-law, no, I hate picking on mother's-in-law. My mother-in-law is amazing. So your mother's aunt comes over to dinner and says, well, your child shouldn't be eating that, or why are you letting her eat too much, or she's not eating enough. And you bristle, but you also feel pressure. And then that person's goal has just taken over. So you want to get clarity with your goal, and it's great to write it down and remind yourself. And you can even take it a step further with what I do is what is at stake. If you don't focus on the goal, what might happen? And if you are, like, what could be the benefits? The next thing that we talked about in this course is reframing healthy eating, which could be a whole nother.
That's a complete show all by itself. Yeah.
But just thinking, I recommend thinking about eating well-being, which supports you emotionally, socially, and physically. So diet culture is there promoting physical health. Everything is there designed to promote your physical health, and we're trained to eat. Like overall health and well-being is a complete state of social, emotional, and physical health. I believe that eating should be a complete state of social, emotional, and physical, but diet culture pushes it that it's just physical. We're just trying to keep our physical body in shape, and that's not true. So if you can broaden it to eating well-being, you can allow for those things: emotional eating because you're at a party or you're celebrating. Those are okay and positive. We don't always have to eat, the food with the most antioxidants and the least calories. That's actually when you focus on the takeaway from it is when you elevate physical health above social and emotional, those other elements or domains usually get hurt,
Right. Absolutely. No, I believe that. And that's really redefining what health looks like and how, food, and that's where it gets hard. That's one of my whole other platforms is when the people you look up to for healthcare, like dietitians and doctors, et cetera, are promoting that diet culture piece. Like, I feel like, oh, that's not really healthcare. That's like, it's challenging. So that's a great point, is that to consider your whole health, your mental, social, emotional, physical health as like this symphony that has to all work together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. And that comes up a lot in counseling, because parents will come in with the agenda of wanting to get a weight under control. And then we'll talk about what is actually at stake. And when they realize their true goal, and goes back to clarity, is for their child to be happy and comfortable and, have great relationships, then why do we really want to force or even pressure them to eat more vegetables if it's actually hurting their self-esteem or hurting, their,
right.
Just to keep moving on. The next step would be tuning into trust, or turning into trust, building trust. And that is what we use the division of responsibility for as a strategy. So as a parent, if you're just hearing about this, you could Google it. You could come to my website. I have some articles about it. You can look at the Ellen Satter Institute, ellensatterinstitute.org. You can, I hate to say just Google because you never know what comes up, but so ellensatter.org, or you can come to NourishHer.com, which is my site, and just get some information about the division of responsibility. Start to ease in it. Start to think about how it would look for you. What makes you comfortable? What makes you uncomfortable about it? So start to explore that.
Right. And knowing that it looks different for every age of child, and potentially even for different children in your family, depending on their kind of personal disposition and things like that. There can be more nuance to it than.
Yeah, there's more nuance in the sense that all kids have different like eating temperaments. So some kids are very food responsive, and when we restrict or limit, they get very upset and they need more permission. Other kids, you could say, hey, you know what? We're not going to have dessert, or we're not, and they're just like, whatever, certain kids aren't as food responsive. So it doesn't mean as much. But working with parents that have multiple kids are always, usually families have one of each. So I like to take the stress off moms too. We have to work with something that works for her schedule and for the whole family. So we don't want to cater too much, but you might recognize that one child might have one issue and another might have another. We need to figure it all out together. But the division of responsibility, the next step or tip or strategy is coming up with that structure. So when we create structure together, when you figure out your timing of meal and snacks, you might have to move it a little if you have two kids on different schedules, or depending on what's going on. That need to take into account.
Right. And being able to do this with some amount of flexibility and self-compassion and just sort of gentle care.
Exactly. We don't want to so I always like to remind people that being flexible is a sign of strength. So when I say, let's come up with a time to eat, like, well, can we do it at 5 or 5:15? It could be within, 35, 40 minutes. We don't give yourself, you be a little flexible. And being flexible with food is a sign of what we call eating confidence as well. That's something you want to build for yourself and your child. You want them to be able to come to the table and not freak out if there's, salmon on the table and they only eat French fries. You want them to be flexible and be accepting with food.
Well, that's awesome. So I want everybody to know where they can find you. And if you have anything's going on, I'll list all your links and everything in the show notes so they can find you, because obviously you have a bunch of knowledge that we were not able to tap into in this, pretty short conversation. But where can people find you, and what sort of services do you offer?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you again so much for having me on. I enjoy the conversation.
Of course.
So much, so important. And I do commend any mom or parent who's even interested in looking at this and being reflective on their own relationship with food. I give you so much credit, and I really admire that. And your daughters are so lucky to have you thinking about it.
Yes.
So you can find me, you can come to my site. It's NourishHer with 2 H's. So it's Nourish and then Her all together.
Put together.
Yeah, NourishHer.com. And I have the NourishHer Wealth program, which is a 12-week program that we go through. But I also have a free mini class that you could take. I was just talking about. You can come in, you can take it. We have a little community for every cohort of the workshop.
Oh, great.
Yeah, you can meet other moms who are like-minded with you and learn from each other. And I come in too and talk once a week. So that's another resource. And there I have a lot of free handouts and things that I've developed over time. So you can access those as well. And you can always email me and questions. Those are so great. Whatever you're thinking, you can ask me because usually other moms have the same question. And when you've ever been in a class, when you hear other people's questions, you're like,
yes,
oh, I was wondering about that,
Right. Well, and that's a benefit. I have a community aspect of my program too. And I think that that's so huge to have, to not feel isolated, because part of diet culture and disordered eating and having an eating disorder is that isolation piece. And so when you're, actively working against that, to know that there's other people doing the same thing that, can help you and you can support them. And I think that's a great way that people.
takes
Yeah.
away, there's so much shame with these things. And I think that I like to always encourage people, like, it's generous to come into these communities and share your experience, because when you give voice to something, there are other women who hear it that might not have been able to do that. So the more you're willing to share, the better off we all are. So I love community, and I would love for anyone to come in and be a fly in the wall or ask questions, whatever you want. I think it's great.
Well, fabulous. And thank you so much for being part of my community and giving your time today and your expertise, Amelia. I know that you've helped a lot of people through this. So thank you again for coming on.
Thank you, Maggie.
She is so knowledgeable. We could have kept talking, but I try to keep these conversations manageable for my listeners, and I usually try not to go over 40-ish minutes, but sometimes it's just worth keeping on. I've got such fantastic guests that bring such a unique perspective to this conversation. And I think it's really important. I got a lot of moms, a lot of parents who listen and are part of my communities. And I knew that they would enjoy Amelia's professional take on raising your kids in a non-diet way. So let me remind you just real quickly again before we sign off that all of Amelia's contact information is in the show notes for you to find her and join her and look at her offerings. Also, if you haven't gotten into my free Facebook group, I would love to have you. Just send me a direct message that says Facebook on Facebook or on Instagram, and I'll get you your invitation. Next week, I've got a big announcement, so check back in right before Thanksgiving. There's a new episode of The Eatfluencer, comes out every Wednesday, and we will talk soon. Until next time. Thank you so much for being here today. If you love what you've learned, follow me on social media at Maggie Landis MD, and you'll never miss a thing. You can also check out my website at maggielandismd.com and sign up to be part of our community of eaters. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll talk again soon.